The Last of Us Part 2 has been a game filled with controversy prior to its release on June 19th, 2020. Whether you feel the same way people did, or were excited and happy with the leaks, the goal of this review isn't to discuss that at all, but to give a brief, overall review of the game and some takeaways I had when playing. For those who have already played, I won't be touching upon every single talking point of the game, but just going out what stuck out to me and expanding upon that in the following format. Gameplay, involving AI mechanics and controls. Story, mainly just the core story we have here. The gaming score, the musical tracks and audio sound cues of the game. And last but not least, the visuals. Gameplay. For me, this is the biggest reason for playing a game, with a close second being story, which we'll get further into later. The biggest question I was asked by friends was, how does this game stack up to others or its predecessor? The short answer for those looking forward and just want to click off is, it plays really well. This review will be done with respect to the grounded mode difficulty, because I'm a glutton for punishment and start the game off in this mode. For those who are unaware, this is a difficulty that was not available when the game was first released, and to be honest, it frustrated the heck out of me. And I'll explain one main reason why shortly, but first, let's talk about the AI. This section will be different for those who played on a different difficulty, since there were tweaks made on the grounded difficulty. My experience with the AI in this game has been mostly positive. Like any game that plays like The Last of Us, enemies start out unalerted, patrolling through areas. If they are alerted, their patrol paths change to more sporadic routes, depending on where you were seen, and also if they have a dog. They work well together to flank you and cover angles that you may want to retreat to, while keeping out the pressure and make you feel that every step you take matters, giving little room for error, less risk being killed. There are a few moments I ran into here and there where they would shuffle into one area, one at a time, only to die by my square push, which totally broke immersion for the game for me. But these instances were far and few between. Something else I noticed that the AI would do at times while patrolling were make unpredictable turns and look around in case something may be there. This made stealthy enemies a bit more challenging than normal, where in some cases they would only turn around to see me crouch walking towards them, making me go for a loud kill, alerting others around. The last bit that I want to touch upon on AI are dogs. Have you ever played a game and was introduced into a new enemy and thought to yourself, let me kill that first before it causes any sort of havoc, or alternatively, let me just not mess around with that thing and then just try and move on? Yeah, that were dogs for me in this game. At first, they weren't terrible at all, but the addition to dogs forces the player to think about engagements in a totally different fashion, since you typically cannot melee stealth kill an enemy that has a dog. Should you instead stealthily kill the handler first with a ranged weapon so that the dog stays in place and then try and sneak around? Should you try to stealthily kill the dog but alert the guard in the process to an enemy around and then they begin their caution patrols? Should you attempt and sneak by and take a pass so that the dog doesn't sniff you out but inevitably it does find you? The choice is up to you. And I love that the game introduces this enemy to shake up the normal stealth walk melee kill simulator that this game can become sometimes. As far as the mechanics and controls go for this game, it feels really good. Rarely did I ever feel like I was fighting the game rather than the situations the game put me in that I had to figure out. Controls felt responsive and much more realistic take on cover-based shooting that I really haven't had in a while. Earlier I'd stated that there's a certain something that frustrated the heck out of me, and this is where I want to go into details. I don't understand why in games like this, where you stealthily kill enemies and they drop their weapons, you cannot pick it up. Hear me out here. The Last of Us Part 2, even the first one, prides itself on a group of individuals surviving, scavenging what they have around them, just like the first one, to get by. It's shown to the player how many places that you've been around that have been repurposed to fit such needs, such as Abigail's story. There is a football stadium that has been transitioned into a base to house a group of individuals. Scrap parts are used to help craft and create upgrades for weapons in the game, while rags and cans are used to craft usable items. This is where my personal vendetta begins. Can you tell me why, when I kill a guard who clearly has a fully loaded weapon, why I can't take the magazine or clip or gun itself to use, but I'm able to use such items such as bricks and bottles consistently? Is the game trying to make me believe that each guard I kill has been walking around with an empty clip or magazine and only act like they're going to shoot me? For anyone who's played Metal Gear Solid 4, Sons of the Patriots, it made sense why the protagonist could not use enemy weapons. So at least this game could have created some sort of explanation as to why our characters don't do this or for some reason can't do this. Regardless, if they did or didn't, this is an entire cutscene here where our character actually does exactly what I'm stating. This is a huge gripe I had when playing the first game and follows into this game, and honestly it infuriated me, especially when you think about the level of detail that they put into this game. But alright, rant is over. Back to some more mechanics and controls. As noted earlier, like any sort of game with RPG mechanics, you collect scrap parts or medicinal pills to either upgrade your gun or character respectively into what they can do or how much of something you craft. There aren't enough of each to collect everything, so you're encouraged to level up really what works best for your playstyle. I personally lean more on scopes and crafting additional supplies for the same material costs, but others may want to upgrade perks that cater to a more stealthy play option. The choice is yours on how you want to handle it, and I think there's a good amount of options to choose from, though some are clearly more useful than others. Moving feels really nice around the map, and when you start running, you really feel the weight of your character and the speed and motion. I didn't really have any issues with fighting the game itself, camera angles, or really positioning myself where I wanted to be at any given time. So, with respect to the controls, and mostly for the mechanics of the game, everything felt really solid. This is obviously a continuation of the first Last of Us, telling the tale of Ellie and Joel and what happens after they get to their destination Jackson, where Joel's younger brother Tommy is, and of course how they live happily ever after, blissfully. And if I left it at this, I would be a bold-faced liar, because that is not exactly what happens at all.
You stupid old man. You don't get to rush this.
And we'll get into it. We start playing as Ellie in Jackson, with a few new faces that unfortunately don't matter too much in the grand scheme of the game because they just won't be here that long. We have Discount Glenn from The Walking Dead, Jesse, and Dina, another new character for Ellie to interact with in Jackson. Even though initially I stated here in the grand scheme of the game they don't matter too much, I enjoyed each of these characters and what they brought to the table. Dina is someone who grew up in this outbreak, but still is able to show a soft, caring, nurturing side that Ellie struggles with. And Jesse, who at times feels like a protective friend that you'd always want around to cover you, just in case anything went south. You see, since arriving in Jackson, Ellie has been attempting to assimilate into the closest thing to a civilization since the fall of civilization, but she's been feeling really isolated. Dina and Jesse are two people who are around her age, and she seems to bump into them enough at Jackson enough to form a friendship. It's understood at one point Dina was dating Jesse for some amount of time, they break up, and then sometime later, at a winter dance held at Jackson that they're all attending, Dina kisses Ellie, which of course pisses off the bar owner for some apparent reason, to the point where he pretty much tells them to GTFO and get out of there with that gay/lesbian-ish. Joel, who clearly, if you played the first game, who doesn't have anyone talk bad to Ellie, jumps into it, and he sticks up for Ellie. And Ellie, being the angsty teen girl that she is now, tells Joel that she can handle herself and storms out into the darkness of the night. So, in the end, everyone wins. Joel clearly gets shat on. Ellie is upset and mad at Joel leaving. I believe Dina actually leaves out with Ellie as well. And we have Discount Glenn, who is somewhere in sight, who sees what's going on, slash sees what happens, and kind of is like, eh? At first, when you play, you don't get this entire story, as it's broken up throughout the game. And it's actually much easier if you were to get kind of all of this up front, so you could actually understand what's going on. But the game really does not like to tell the entire cohesive story from the jump, using flashbacks going forwards and backwards at some of the worst points, honestly, when you play the game. Alright, back to Jackson. So Jackson does patrols to keep the area safe from infected from killing people, and possibly bring survivors in that they find in the areas. The main one to take note of who does patrols here are Joel, Ellie, Dina, Jesse, and Tommy. There are a few others who do patrols, but for the sake of the story, this is where our focus lies. For this portion of the game, Dina and Ellie are paired together on patrol, Tommy and Joel, and Jesse just gets the short end of the stick and I guess doesn't really take anyone with him. So once again, for time's sake, the main thing to take note of here for Ellie's side are the following. Dina and Ellie do their patrol. Dina and Ellie stumble upon a basement with members of Jackson who have recently passed away. The basement of one of these members of Jackson contains a ton of weed. So they get the idea in the middle of the blizzard that's going on that they're going to partake and begin to smoke. And on top of randomly smoking this weed that they found in the middle of a basement during a zombie apocalypse, they also decide to have sex. Now, I'm not sure about anyone here, but if I'm going to partake in any sort of substance like this during an outbreak, at least be at your home base that, has fences, outside guards on rotation, other people to look after you, what have you. But this game, I noticed, tends to throw logic out of our characters for some reason, and this is just one moment I couldn't just overlook for the sake of this being a game. It just doesn't really make any sense someone would do this and not have any sort of precautions in place. Let me know in the comments if this kind of stuck out to you guys for those who played the game, or if maybe I'm just kind of overreacting with it. But it just felt really strange watching this moment happen. Suddenly, there's a noise heard outside, and Ellie and Dina try and get their clothes on as quick as possible. It turns out it's actually Discount Glenn, and he runs down to the basement because he hears something going on because he's looking for Ellie and Dina. So, as he gets down the steps and sees what's happened, there is an awkward bit that follows, since, Jesse and Dina dated, and he walks in on them, clearly finishing having sex or bonding, what have you, and they used to date. So it's just a bit weird for everyone. In this moment, Jesse, starts to say, hey, clearly you guys aren't on your patrols, the thing that's important to keep people alive. And he mentions to them that Joel and Tommy have been missing from their posts, which prompted him to look for them, and clearly he stumbles upon them in this basement. Worried, Dina and Ellie separate in order to cover more ground to kind of see what's going on with Joel and Tommy. And it is during this first part of the game that we have been given an introduction to one of, if not the most hated character I've seen in a while, Abigail, also known as Abby Anderson. Surprise, there are character swaps in this game, and they have been occurring intermittently throughout the first portion of the game. To be honest with you, I really wasn't expecting this, and I thought this journey was going to focus primarily on Ellie and Joel. But nah, that's not what this game's about at all. In this moment when I was streaming through her parts, some people kind of came in wondering what happened to Ellie, because if you don't know by now, this girl is swole. So under first glance, I guess a few people honestly just mistook Ellie for Abigail. And honestly, if you did, you'd probably be wondering the same things as to what the heck just happened to our girl Ellie. Alright, since there's clearly character swaps, let's go through Abigail's side real quick, since this game is typically played in parallels between Ellie and Abigail. Abigail is seen with a group of people traveling: Mel, who is the medic of the group; Owen, who is the love interest, because we definitely need more of those in these types of games. And to be honest, I can't really remember the rest of the party, because most of them either don't hold much relevance and or we're not introduced to them with names. It's roughly about 15 people or so, and this is an expedition for Joel. but only, like I said, 3 or 4 of them really have names. Owen wakes up Abigail just to take a hike to see where Jackson is. He informs Abby that their mission to find Joel may not be possible anymore because of how large a compound Jackson is. Owen then tells Abby that he's going to leave it up to her to make the decision and tell the group, and walks back to the campsite. Abby, who is clearly frustrated at what Owen has said that makes total sense, decides to say screw this, and she starts to stumble down the mountain by herself to try and locate Joel. I think at this point in the game, when I was playing through, I was tempted to rebrand Abby's name to Naked Snake due to the fact that she actually thinks that she was going to be able to find one select individual out of a compound this big. And at this point, it really just seems more of an infiltration mission, but with no actual real facts to go off of during an entire infection that has taken over the world. So in my eyes, I was like, there's really no chance of her doing this. I mean, that's just totally unrealistic. There's just no way possible that she could ever bump into.
Hey, I'm Tommy. That's
Alright, so Abby actually happens to find Joel on patrol through a massive wave of infected that had been encountered. And since Joel and Tommy were on patrol and saw Abby needing assistance, they decided to help and trusted Abby and for her to lead them to her settlement where they would be safe until daytime. They let them know that they're from Jackson and that if they are seeking refuge, then they can definitely come back. Clearly, if you're new to any of The Last of Us, this isn't really what happens. So from here, Abby takes a golf club and decides to tee off on Joel while Tommy is tied down. At this point in the game, we have no idea why Abby is doing this, who she really is, and what she represents. We just know that we don't like what she's doing, especially since Joel and Tommy literally just saved this girl's life. From here, we character swap back to Ellie for a long time from this point forward, playing the role of finding the mansion Joel is in, breaking and entering in the home, and once there, you are ambushed with no one watching the entrances for some reason, and the characters even talk about this, which I found pretty interesting to put here. But anyway, Ellie is now forced to watch Joel's last breaths, with Abby smashing the golf club over his head. From here, Abigail's group knocks Ellie out unconscious rather than killing her and Tommy outright, and this is what serves as Ellie's call to arms to begin her journey for this game. We're taken to Jackson to watch our characters mourn, and then set out on our revenge quest to kill Abigail and anyone involved in Joel's death. Or technically murder. At this point, once morning's done, Ellie decides to leave, and even after Tommy tells her to give it a day to think about what she wants to do, she waits to contemplate, but then realizes Tommy left out before her. So now she actually needs to hurry up and catch up to Tommy, who has left before her, and also, do the whole revenge, murder thing. Dina decides to tag along, and they depart Jackson on a one-way, non-refundable ticket for revenge. And honestly, that's really the entire main base of the game. That's kind of the story that we're given. So, on first glance, this story really isn't the worst by a long shot, but with the world building done in the first game, the character traits that we're understood and that were set by the first game, I just wanted to see something so much more as far as the story is concerned. And for me, it really just didn't deliver this at all. I wanted the main focus of this game really to be on Ellie and Joel, but clearly that's not what's happening. And unfortunately, there are some points of reference that I need to reference of the first game with respect to the world building and character traits. It's no surprise that this universe is a direct parallel to our own, even more so with the big set going around right now. We're introduced in this game, the first one, to a loving father-daughter relationship between Joel and Sarah. This suddenly changes as his daughter is killed by a US soldier when attempting to flee their community based on the infection going on. Joel, after this, lives his life with just the remnants of what was versus what could have been, understandably becoming a cold and bitter man. He gets in contact with another Firefly who offers Joel the job of taking Ellie and transporting her safely to a medical facility to engineer a cure for humanity. Over the course of this transport quest, we grow with Joel, understanding why he treats Ellie so coldly at times, to keep his own emotions at bay with his own loss that he hasn't fully gotten over. There's a duality at play here, with Joel being in a protector role of a father during their travels, while also keeping his emotions at bay to protect himself. It's an emotional journey that even gets turned upside down, as at one point the roles reverse, and Ellie is the one who actually has to take care of Joel due to a sickness that weakens him. Ellie doesn't really have any family left, and over the course of the journey has warmed up to Joel, seeing him sort of as a father that she never had. At the end of the job transporting Ellie to the hospital, it's then found out that in order to make a cure for humanity, Ellie must die, since the cure to the fungal infection is located in her brain. Joel, having gone through the loss of a daughter outside of his power, chooses instead to make this choice for her, putting power into his own hands, and taking Ellie, fleeing the hospital, killing everyone in the process. The journey ends with Joel telling a lie to Ellie about that day, and they continue their trip on to Jackson. The reason for this quick summation of the first game is just to show all the moving parts of characters from the very beginning of the story to the end. I felt compelled to see what choices each character would make based on their life experience. If a cure for society would result in the transformation of the world into what it was before, or if it would further spiral the world into the warring tribe state that it's currently in. To see Joel's growth with Ellie in the journey, and to see how Ellie changed, as well as every passing struggle impacted them. Seeing these two grow was absolutely phenomenal, and the ending climax was beautifully executed and humanistically complex to set up a secondary game that could really open up this world. Then I played this one, and it's a game that's just settled upon revenge and destroyed so many well-constructed characters throughout its warpath, old and new. Now, clearly, not everyone has these opinions. Once I completed the game, I kind of sat and pondered upon what this narrative was actually trying to tell me. So far, on the surface level, revenge never really grants what it is exactly that the person wants. On both ends, Ellie and Abigail both go through this and lose pretty much everyone around them, falling into an isolation that wasn't present when the game started. Each is left off in a worse predicament than what they began. I wanted to try and find meaning in this, but honestly, I really couldn't. One side of me rationalized that this was never supposed to be a tale that has a happy ending, and maybe at one point I was fine with this. But then, after looking forward to this and the type of effort that's been put into each character, just for it to be dashed away so quickly really was unsettling. Maybe this was instead supposed to show a parallel of real life, where in any moment, any and everything can be ripped away from us with or without explanation, based on events that you had no control of. I can get behind this idea, and so far, that's my biggest takeaway of it. What were some of yours? So, if they really wanted to do a game or a part 2 in this fashion, instead, I think this is what I would have rather saw. Imagine instead of playing through this game, we started a brand new journey with Abby and her father Jerry. We go through a journey similar to the first, but instead with a functioning father-daughter relationship to understand Abigail's character, who she was, and who her father is. We could learn about the creation of the Fireflies, get more time with Marlene, how the Fireflies came to operate and expand, introduce the characters that are currently in part 2, such as Mel, who is the prodigy student of Jerry. We would get more time with Owen, who is Abigail's love interest, etc. This story could be the center function of the world and expand upon it, rather than the dysfunctional world that we got in the first game. And then, at the end of Abigail's journey, we could end it off at the hospital, where Abigail runs into the hospital and comes to find every single one of her dead Firefly friends, ultimately going into the surgery room, where she walks in and sees her father is killed. At this point, she could swear her vengeance, like what she did in part 2 currently, and we could have part 2, or in this case part 3, play out like it did, but without any sort of flashbacks. And I think we'd have a much greater understanding of each character, so that each time one of them has been ripped away from us in either Ellie's or Abigail's story, it would mean so much more since we'd be able to spend more time with them and see what sort of impact they made on other characters. Now, I'm still not totally thrilled at the above idea, but I still feel it would have made a much better story to be told, as the player would have been left with more time to house conflicting thoughts, to see if we're on Team Joel for what he did, or Team Abigail, since we would have played through and had time with Abigail to learn and grow with her, like we did with Ellie and Joel. Unfortunately, we really didn't get that sort of development with Abigail in this game that I feel like we definitely needed. In addition to a much better story, they could have made alternative, or should I say additional games as well within this universe for a much clearer direction. Here's another story idea that I feel could have worked really well for part 2 if we kind of explored it. This story would have been focused on an additional way to generate immunity that another faction has discovered outside of Jackson, or even outside the WLF. This faction decides to hoard the cure exclusively for themselves, rather than spread the cure across the lands, which makes Jackson pretty unhappy. But people are split. Jackson has survived this long by sticking to what they believe to be true, not policing others. But there are some people in Jackson who feel that if there's a shot at saving the world, then this is worth their life, and they're ready to go to war over getting access to this cure. During the discourse between Jackson and this other tribe, Ellie learns that a cure could have already been created, but Joel instead ruined that chance. This moment here throws a deep rift between their relationship, and Ellie decides through the guilt that she feels that she could have saved the entire world, but this opportunity was taken away from her selfishly by Joel. Later on in that evening, she decides to go to that base by herself in order to try and secure a cure so that she can actually do what she feels she should have needed to do the entire time, which is help the world. She goes into this base alone or with partners, what have you, and it actually doesn't turn out to be a cure at all. They're actually experimenting on the infected to try and isolate parts of their genes in order to attempt to genetically modify soldiers and actually grant them some types of immunity, just more of a take over the kind of world type feel. This group could have been the Seraphites, and a core belief could be that this fungus is actually a gift in disguise, and only certain chosen are meant to actually have this sort of power. This could also give us some really interesting enemies that could be added into the story to keep up a change of pace. This could also give some more dynamics as to how different groups view Ellie's immunity, as something as being sacred in the Seraphites, but for other people, something that gives her much jealousy and scorn since she doesn't have to deal with the infected, or should I say the infection, like they have to. In all honesty though, I just really wanted to see more out of part 2. And this story isn't completely atrocious in my eyes, I just feel that it could have been handled so much better with how many tools were at their disposal and how well they built their characters and world. Typically, this isn't an area that I would normally focus on, but as I've grown the appreciation of games in other ways other than gameplay, this is one area I think is worth mentioning, though I don't really have too much to say about it. This game isn't a game that hosts an original soundtrack that's worth purchasing to jam out from time to time. I think a few of the best moments to appreciate is the sound of this game are in areas where you pick up the guitar and you start playing whatever you want, how you want. There's some pretty incredible people out there who have done covers with this game's guitar that I'll post a link around so that you can take a look at it. Honestly, if this is your kind of thing, I think it's pretty cool just seeing people play all these different covers, recordings, and just being able to take those with you to just listen to, knowing that you created something in this game that sounds really awesome. As far as audio cues go, they're done incredibly well for this game. Clickers at times can make you feel that each step that you take could be your last. Noise echoes in corridors. Enemies who are killed with melee finishers or stealth kills can be heard gurgling their last breaths. So honestly, there's a lot to be said about the quality of audio this game brings, and I'm really kind of unsure if it's really talked about. Even the lack of sound in areas really ups and ramps up the tension of the encounters that soon occur. This is the least important aspect of a game, but that doesn't mean it does not hold any sort of relevance and can change how a game is experienced. With that being said, my goodness, this game is freaking beautiful. There's really no excuses about how absolutely stunning this game is. The attention to detail in characters, weaponry, environments, how characters move, the animations, my goodness. These subtle animations can be found just about everywhere. There are animations for moving around corners, for corner kills when enemies come in unsuspectedly, kill animations for each weapon, dodges into kills, and most importantly, the thing I saw the most of, the many ways that you can die over and over and over again. Honestly, I don't really know what else to say. Everything in this graphics department is just superb, and I don't know what sort of better direction they honestly could have taken from here. I was 100% satisfied with what I looked at playing on the standard PlayStation 4, not a Pro. For those of you who have watched this far and made it, thank you. This was my first review of any sort of game I've created, so I'll be ecstatic if you could just leave a comment and let me know how you felt, or if I've touched any nerves, or maybe if I just completely missed any points. I want to be able to kind of consistently work on improving, and that kind of can't be done without your feedback. So no matter how harsh it may sound, it is appreciated. I also want to give a couple content creators some shout outs that I drew inspiration from, even though clearly they have no idea who I am. But the inspiration comes mainly from Game Ranks and Super Eye Patch Wolf. I really enjoy the content each of these creators puts forth in their efforts, and maybe one day I wish to be about half as good as them. And the other half, just some other mix of kind of what I bump into throughout life. Other than that, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all in another video. Take care now.